Sixth Avenue was everything. Plymouth came years after. And don't forget, Plymouth was only about maybe 4 blocks. But Sixth Avenue was solid Jews. From Lyndale to Logan, it was everything there. You had the shoemakers, the butchers, the bakers, just everything, all the trades. In fact, there was a feed store. You don't even know what a feed store is, do you?
Well, it's for animals.
No, where the people, there were a lot of horses. On my block, there was probably 4 horses. There were junk peddlers. There were also a lot of Italians. They were fruit peddlers. And they had to buy feed for their horses. So there was a feed store on 6th Avenue North between Emerson and Fremont. And I remember the owner was Meyer Rosenblatt. And he looked like he was always drunk. He probably was too, you know.
Almost every parent was a peddler at that era. There were fruit peddlers, junk peddlers like my dad or Sam's dad. Manny's dad had a store.
Yeah,
he was an entrepreneur.
You know, we had the only corner grocery store in the middle of the block. That's a great location.
Because every block there was a corner store. And they all had the middle. That's right.
And they all made a living. Like where I lived on 11th and Emerson. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grocery stores on 2 corners. I can name them. And we had Cone.
Kirchenovic?
No, we
Where were
had Cone, we had Grossman, or Goodman,
Becker.
Hiller, Zeitlin,
Beckers.
and Shedloff.
Where was Kirchenovic's butcher?
They were on 8th
They were on
Avenue.
8th
That was
Avenue.
Upper Red. And they
Okay.
all made a living.
Yeah,
And those people owned all the property around there. They did well.
The children were always respected. Now, North Side has been known as, we used to have a mayor of the North Side, and that was Ben Wilson. And if you read the newspapers from way back then, he was in charge of a lot of things that had to do with racketeering and stuff like that. And whenever the kids were, the school was about 2 blocks. It was about a block off of 6th Avenue. I keep calling it Olson Highway. 6th Avenue. And many of the people that were weren't gangs. I call it racketeering business, and that was black and white.
Yes.
They hung out on that avenue. And the school was just on the next block. And whenever the children would come past there, if they were the pimps and the prostitutes, if they were standing out there, they would be fussing or cursing. Children would be coming by to go to school. They would respected them. They would say to each other, "Don't you see these children coming by? Be quiet." And I mean, it's so much different than it was then. I mean, you were looked upon as something precious and, meaningful. But now, of course, that's all changed.
Yeah, it was a family store, and we were a typical family of that generation. There were 7 of us, and we all worked in the store. And we all worked in the store all the time that we went through college. We all went most through college. And even when we were married, the in-laws would work in the store during the Passover holidays. And that was part of marrying into the family. And it didn't matter what you had going, you worked every weekend especially.
My dad, for instance, at the old Olson Highway place, the immigrants liked their special tobacco that he imported from Greece and Turkey. And at that time, I think I was old enough to climb on the counter, and the tobacco was put into a tube, which was a forerunner of the filter cigarettes today. And this tube, you had a little mechanism that you would put the tobacco in and fold it up and then ram the tobacco into the tube, for which, if I filled a box of 100, I got a nickel. Yiddish newspapers, of which I think we sold about 500 a day of different publishers, plus a few romantic Yiddish magazines. And there was almost an air of great disappointment if on Saturday night when we opened up, the Express people had not delivered the Roman, which was romantic magazines which were of a serial nature. And the elderly Jewish women could not live with the equivalent of Perils of Pauline, so to speak. The variety of merchandise there was both of Hebrew nature and Yiddish nature, was of both religious and secular, in that a lot of the women did not learn how to read Hebrew from a Siddur. So they had books called Ivra Taich, which means a translation of Hebrew in Yiddish, so they could go to the synagogue and follow the service in the Yiddish part of that book. And there was also little papers called Blettlach that were put at the headboard of women who were in labor, and that was supposed to make their labor easier with God's help. And so those are some of the interesting things. Of course, there was the tefillin and the tallesim and the New Year cards and the special hats for the cantors and so on. These people who came over, they started with a push cart, and then they grew up into a store, but they lived in the back of the store with the family, and as economic conditions got better, they rented or bought a home. And it was if they ever want to study early before World War I and after World War I economics, from the point of people being entrepreneurs before there were oligarchies and monopolies and so on, this is a case study of that street, going all the ways out to the Glenwood Park of entrepreneurship. One of the people living on this Highland Avenue in the so-called upper area was the Salisbury family. And there was a fellow, Harrison Salisbury, who palled around with my brothers and with other Jewish kids there. He later became the foreign correspondent for the New York Times, spent 20 years in Russia writing for the New York Times. He published a book shortly before his death called Journey in Our Times, of which the first 40 pages describe the North Side, 6th Avenue North, Highland, Royalston, and the surrounding areas, and it's very worthwhile reading because you get the real flavor of that community.
But the amazing part of it was, and what I've learned through all these years, is the character of these people, the honesty of them. If you couldn't afford to pay for the groceries, you brought in $1. These merchants, or we gave them on credit. They were people that were designed to see that their children would get a better education than they had. But as far as working, it was work all the time, except Shabbos, 7 days a week, 7 nights.
You could always walk down Plymouth Avenue and there were hordes of people on the sidewalks. You would meet all your friends and you would talk and you would stand on the corners and gossip, and it was just a fun place to be.
Something like what's happening here today at the Jewish Community
Right.
Center.
So we knew all the drugstores and the butcher shops and the shoemaker on Plymouth Avenue. And there were corners that we hung out, either Desnick's or the Delicatessen, the Homewood Theater. That era will never be duplicated again.
I worked a lot of places on Plymouth Avenue as a youngster. I started working for Venus Koval.
Oh, sure.
And did deliveries for him. I was 14 years old, and he found out later I didn't have a driver's license, and he said, "Why didn't you tell me you didn't have a driver's license? You never asked me if I had a driver's license. I could drive." I worked for Joe and Teeter at the drugstore, first delivering my bike, and then I was a soda jerk. I worked for Sonny Malinsky at the Northside Bakery. I worked for Willard Vinitsky at Willard's Catering. For Sonny, I remember on Friday night, the
Couldn't hold a job.
couldn't hold the job. I wanted all the experiences. On Friday night, they used to close a shade in the windows of the Delicatessen. If anybody remembers that.
Yes, I do. Yes, I
They used
do.
to close the shade, and I remember that on Saturday, I had to come back to the Northside Bakery and help bake bread so that on Saturday night, when sundown came, I delivered bread to Bruckens. They would not open the door until sunset. And I delivered bread, and people would come in and be in line to go into Bruckens after sundown. That my experiences that I enjoyed on Plymouth helped to reinforce the values I have in life. And I recall Plymouth Avenue with a great deal of fondness and many things. You know, Plymouth Avenue, we had people that had their own rules about where they parked and double parked on the street.
That's right.
And Plymouth Avenue had its own Jewish policeman, Leo Besner,
Oh,
who
yeah.
came down the street and
Remember him?
tagged everybody.
They used to say he'd tag his mother.
And then you go to Henry Bank and get them fixed up.
That's right.
Sam, I'd like to say triple parking was invented on Plymouth Avenue. The streetcar could not pass if somebody wanted to run into a delicatessen or into a
No parking.
into a grocery store or pick something up.
Right.
They triple parked. They really did not care. There was single parking, double parking, and triple parking. The streetcar could not get by.
I recall the neighborhood at that time, it was kind of nice because when the high holy days came along, we could go to the synagogue and we could walk down the middle of Plymouth Avenue. Everything was quiet because it was a Jewish holiday. It was very much a Jewish neighborhood, and we grew up feeling quite comfortable with that.
I was in graduate school in Boston in 1968, and I had just come home from class, and my wife Carol and I were sitting and watching Huntley Brinkley on the news, and I turned on the 5 o'clock Huntley Brinkley report, and I'm looking and I can't believe what I'm seeing. I see a picture of my dad's gas station on Penn and Plymouth with a Sherman tank parked in the middle of the driveway. And that was the first I knew of the riots on Plymouth Avenue. And I quickly called home to see what was going on. And my dad says, "Don't worry, it's the safest place in town. Nobody's gonna mess with the tank."
I remember, we'd have busy times in the store. Now, like before Passover, a lot of people would come in to buy pots and pans and dishes and stuff. And, I can remember, somebody spending $1 or $1.25, and my dad loading up big boxes of dishes and pots and pans and stuff and delivering. He had a 33 Chevrolet, and, he'd take all these items and he'd deliver to them. But, a $2 sale was a big, big sale. She talks about a $25 sale. I don't believe there was ever a $25 sale there.
My father we had all sorts of merchandise, and we catered at that time when there was relief orders, and you had to fill these relief orders from the government. And so there were Jewish people, non-Jewish people, black, and other Asian people, but there was respect at that time for anybody who brought it in. It didn't deflate their personalities at all. There was always somebody to wait on you. And it was they greeted you with a smile and a good day. So they taught us a lot of value working for the father.
My grandfather came over from Lithuania, and he also brought his whole family over and set them up in stores. And there was Kaplan Brothers and Meyer's Shoes, Meyer's department store. Right. And he set a lot of family up in stores. In those days, nobody had charge cards, and a lot of people were so poor that they were on welfare. And my father had a big ledger, and everyone would charge things and pay weekly. And every time they would buy something, my mother worked right along with him, and my mother would throw in stockings free. I think that's why we were poor, because she always gave things away.
The most wonderful thing about the North Side is that it was a self-contained little community. Had everything there that we needed. They had the drugstore, the baker, the movie theater that we all snuck in on. The Swayman's haircuts, they gave us these great swept-back haircuts that we were trendy guys.
Oh, I went to the Kaplan Brothers,
Yes,
the home of the $1 million haircut.
As I recall, there was about 6 or 7 barbershops. There was Blickers, Rosenkers, Garfinkel's, Swayman's, Kaplan's. I'm going west now, and then somebody.
They were all on Plymouth Avenue, though.
I think, yeah, they are on Plymouth Avenue, and I was told there was another one near the Homewood drugstore, a proprietor by the name of Frenchie, but I haven't been traced that down. I think,
Never heard of that one.
I think he was a ringer.
We were
but
too young.
There was